Our case for this knowledge clip will concern restoration of the mangroves in Lac Lagoon. Lac is a lagoon on the southeast of the island of Bonaire. It is sheltered from impact of the ocean by a barrier reef. The edges of the lagoon are inhabited by mangroves and big parts are covered with seagrasses. According to Stinapa, the local management organization of the area, the lagoon is widely used for recreation, but it mainly has a biological function for the island as an important breeding ground for birds and nursery ground for fish. Previous fishery practices kept channels in the mangroves open. However, these have closed up over time, due to which there is nutrient-depleted water at the back of the mangroves, which causes seaward migration of the mangroves. This is also caused by runoff from land caused by overgrazing. The migration of mangroves causes the lagoon to close up, which would cause loss of seagrass and make it lose its functions as a recreational area, habitat, and nursery grounds. Mangroves are vital to the coastal health of many islands, especially the Lac Lagoon. By intervening in the system, we will be able to prevent the outward expansion of the mangroves towards the sea and around the bay. This would lead to the loss of recreational as well as ecological functions of the bay. It is important to intervene because the area is of economic importance to the locals, largely because of the tourism in the area and the farming practices in the surrounding areas. On top of this, intervention will maintain biodiversity due to preservation of nursery and breeding grounds and ecological balance in the lagoon and possibly the surrounding areas. The management organization of Lac Lagoon is Tinapa Bonaire, also known as the National Parks Foundation Bonaire. This is a non-governmental organization responsible for managing the national parks on Bonaire, an island in the Dutch Caribbean. They oversee both the Bonaire National Marine Park and the Washington Slagbij National Park. Stinapa's mission includes protecting and preserving Bonaire's natural resources, promoting sustainable use, and educating the public about the island's biodiversity and environmental importance. Stinapa is responsible for overseeing the conservation efforts within the marine park, implementing policies that promote biodiversity. They also manage the collection of nature fees, which are mandatory for visitors to these parks. Lac Lagoon is a socio-ecological system because both the sociological aspects, like the tourism, water sports, and fishermen, are dependent on the ecosystem of the lagoon. The ecosystem of the lagoon is also heavily influenced by the social practices that are happening in the lagoon. And the lagoon can even be regarded as being dependent on humans, as it has been made a protected area and is managed by Stinapa. There are several social levels that play a role in the management of Lac Lagoon. On a global scale, the most important player in the field regarding lagoons like Lac, which is an ecosystem that is heavily involved around mangroves, is the Global Mangrove Alliance. Their goal is to connect NGOs, local people, and governmental institutions all around the world in order to protect, sustain, and restore the mangroves on Earth, of which Lac Lagoon is part. When looking at a regional scale, DCNA, the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, comes into view. This is an NGO that supports local national park organizations in the Dutch Caribbean. A local management organization is Tinapa, an NGO that manages the lagoon and the other nature reserves on Bonaire. They also manage/support the mangrove maniacs. Both of these are considered to be on a local scale. There are also several ecological levels that play a role in this case. On the biggest scale, it is important to take into account the Caribbean Sea. This is where Bonaire is found, and it has a huge influence on the local climate and both biotic and abiotic conditions on the islands in the sea. When zooming in a bit, the next ecological levels that plays a role is the island of Bonaire and its surrounding waters. This is where Lac Lagoon can be found. Most important is of course Lac Lagoon itself, with all of its ecological interactions. Chances are small it will get more local than this. These are the most important social systems and ecosystems that play a role in the mangrove restoration on Bonaire. The system interactions that can be found in Lac Lagoon are the following. There is a lot of knowledge provided about the socio-ecological system with the help of research that is done in Lac Lagoon. For example, regarding the growth of mangroves. There are many different values that are tied to Lake Lagoon. These regard both ecological value, like the biodiversity the area has to offer, but also cultural value, like the wild donkeys that graze in the lagoon, which are highly valued by the locals. One of the main practices performed in the lagoon is all different types of water sports. And there are many different techniques that are used in the area, like the former digging of canals by fishermen, and the coastal protection the lagoon offers. Sinapa wants to both sustain and transform Lake Lagoon. They want to sustain the current stable habitats and ecosystem services that the lagoon provides. So the habitats of seagrass, that is highly abundant in the lagoon, and the important role it has as a nursery ground for juvenile fish, and as a breeding and living area for many different bird species. But certain things have to transform as well. Transformation has to be done in the management of the mangroves. The mangroves are migrating seaward due to the bad quality of water, more land inward. To prevent this migration, certain farming practices have to be changed in order to prevent/lessen runoff from the farms. And in order to restore the original mangrove forests, the former habitats have to be restored by improving the possibilities for land inward migration of the mangroves. The mangrove areas in Lake Lagoon provide the basis for by far the most biodiverse areas within the lagoon, containing on average 12 species per 50 square meters. The seagrass areas, which exist mainly in shallower parts, also provide high biodiversity. And if the bay were to close up due to the unhealthy conditions more land inward, the lagoon would lose many of its important functions to the ecosystem. It would not be able to be a nursery to young fish anymore, would lose a big part of its capacity to house the amount of birds it does now, and would not be able to perform recreational ecosystem services. So if the health of the system declines, in this case via silting up, it would not be able to function properly or the way it used to. It is of utmost importance to prevent the seaward migration of the mangroves in Lake Lagoon, to ensure its functionality. Implementing the following leverage points together could ensure this. In the past, Lake Lagoon served as a fishing ground for local fishermen who constructed canals to ease their activities. These canals effectively inhibited the growth of mangroves in the surrounding areas, as the canals supplied the mangroves with fresh seawater and nutrients. With the termination of fishing practices and the overgrazing, these canals are gradually closing up, which in turn is leading to seaward migration of the mangroves due to the lack of nutrients. Appointing an organization to dig open the canals and maintain them over time could be a shallow leverage point used to prevent the seaward migration of the mangroves. Another driver of the seaward migration of mangroves is erosion. This occurs due to the overgrazing by goats kept by farmers and wild donkeys, in combination with runoff of water from farmlands surrounding the lagoon. The loss of vegetation due to overgrazing and the runoff from farms together close the canals by erosion and sedimentation, decreasing water quality and causing seaward migration. Establishing a marine protected area that extends past the lagoon into the surrounding areas where livestock and donkeys are not allowed to graze is a shallow leverage point that could be implicated to prevent the closing of the canals. Changing the farming methods and implementing polyculture and rotational grazing can be deeper leverage points to implement. Reducing erosion when runoff occurs and therefore longer term reduce sedimentation and closing of the canals.